Okay, and I know we have a few people that are still trickling in, but we're going to go ahead and begin. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Cara Smith. I'm one of the local program directors for Child Life Disaster Relief and also in charge of our education and training. And I'm joined today by Lindsey Murphy, who is the Assistant Director of Child Life Disaster Relief. We are incredibly thankful and grateful that you all have taken time out of your day to join us. We've got over 200 people here right now and more who are going to watch later, and that's really exciting for us just to come together as a child life community during this time. We know there's a lot happening. Today we're going to focus on the 5 essential needs of children during disaster. And our presentation is really intended for any type of disaster where we're working with children. We obviously are in the midst of a pandemic, a new type of disaster for us, at least as an organization, to be working within. So obviously a lot of the stuff that we say today may come through the lens of the COVID-19 response. And if that's something that's helpful to you right now, please look at it through that lens. If you're in the place where you're overwhelmed by all things coronavirus and you just need to look at this from a general disaster lens, we invite you to do that as well. And so we will begin. What we're going to do today is talk a little bit about the phases of disaster. So when a disaster strikes, what are the phases that come after that? We'll do a little brief discussion about the brain just to better understand where these 5 essential needs are coming from. And then we'll walk through each of these 5 essential needs as a place to kind of focus our attention. Our main goal today is just a chance for us as an organization and as a community to take a collective big deep breath, to kind of slow down. We've all been called to arms lately, been working very hard, we know, in a number of different ways. There's so much information coming at us from so many different places. There's a lot of shoulds around what we should be doing as child life specialists and as parents and just as human beings. And so today we just want to kind of slow down, take a step back, look at disasters, and just focus on these 5 essential needs for children right now. This is actually 5 essential needs for humans in disasters as well. So as we're talking today, you may do a little self-reflection and recognize some of the needs that you may be feeling and maybe some areas in your own life that might need a little bit more attention for you to feel connected in this moment. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lindsey, and she is going to share about disaster response.
Hi everyone, I want to reiterate, thanks for joining us today. We're so happy to have you here with us. Before we get started, we wanted to provide a little bit of context prior to diving into those 5 essential needs. So this graph you're seeing demonstrates the various phases of disaster going across and the emotional highs and lows that tend to characterize those phases going up and down. We're going to try to keep this pretty simple. So for each phase, I'm going to focus on an action taking place and emotions that are commonly experienced. So the first phase is pre-disaster. Sometimes we experience this and sometimes we don't. It really depends on the type of disaster. When this phase is present, so if we're thinking about like a hurricane coming, we get plenty of warning for that. Whereas a man-made disaster, we might not get a warning for. But when it is present, it creates a unique decision-making situation. So we get to decide what are we going to do with that pre-disaster time. So, and what we do depends on how we react during that phase, depends on experiences we've had. So in our past, have we been able to do something to mitigate maybe further effects during that pre-disaster phase? What is our assessment of the current resources available to us? Do I have anything I feel like I can do? Or do I feel powerless already? Where is this warning coming from? So if you get a warning, is it from a trusted source? Do you really believe that where you're hearing this warning, it's really gonna happen? Or do you feel like, you know, maybe that weatherman is always inaccurate? And then again, your social influences. So we look at who's in our circle, who are we surrounded by, what's our community doing? And we think about, you know, how are they reacting? And we're very influenced by that during that phase. Actions taking place, so you might see a lot of preparedness efforts. Social referencing, so you might be looking to others to see how they're reacting, as I mentioned. And then you also might see nothing happening. You might see just business going on as usual. The emotions you might experience: fear, uncertainty, confusion. Is this happening? Is it not happening? And sometimes we don't know, and that the news can be all over the place coming into us. So really assessing what's happening, a lot of confusion. What should I be doing? The next phase is that impact phase. And so this is when the disaster has started. It's taking place. There's no avoiding it at this point. And this is the action you're experiencing is that survival action. So fight, flight, freeze, the faint response. You might be taking cover. You might be gathering those close to you and holding tight. The emotions are often extremely intense during this phase of disaster. So you might experience shock, like this is here, shock, might be in disbelief. There's very little you can actually feel like you can control in that moment. The third phase being the heroic phase. So this is when you can take a quick sigh of relief. Most often, this is when you feel a little bit of the impact lightening up. Oftentimes, the action you're seeing is neighbors helping neighbors. So you're called to, crawl out of wherever you're safe. You're sensing a lot of altruism. There's lots of action taking place. That has a lot to do with our survival mechanisms in our body that increase a lot of those active endorphins and hormones. Emotions, your emotions depend largely on how affected you were, how exposed to the disaster, how personal this impact was to you. You might sense a feeling of relief if you survived. You might be experiencing a lot of shock, a lot of grief if you've experienced a lot of losses. You might be wondering immediately, did your loved one survive? And that'll largely impact that emotional response in this phase. After the heroic is the honeymoon phase. So this is when you hear those sirens coming, those first responders are coming. There's a lot of immediate attention. So people are paying attention, see that you have needs, and are reaching out to meet those needs. So you might have people who maybe were on an outer circle, not necessarily directly impacted, reaching in. They might be providing resources. Shelters might be being set up. Resource centers being set up. There's a lot of social support in the honeymoon phase. A lot of community bonding and cohesion. This is when you often see like hashtag Bahama Strong, a lot of social media presence of good things happening when you're looking for those heroes, as Mr. Rogers says. The emotion we experience is often optimism. You also are very focused often in this phase. So you're focused on the here now. What do I need to do? You're taking good action, and you're very motivated. You see this steep decline then in going into the disillusionment phase. I think that I almost feel that as I'm talking about that of like, oh, then it goes down pretty far. And I think this is when those initial resources start to fade. So those initial relief, the initial responders, they do their job in those first 24, 48 hours, and then sometimes that fades and we are left with these feelings of abandonment or exhaustion. We've had all this adrenaline and we finally realize our tank is empty. We no longer can function on lack of sleep and that adrenaline. The reality and depth of what happened to us, what this disaster meant to us, really begins to set in here. And then, of course, as we know, as a community, often those triggers, those anniversaries, really exacerbate those experiences of abandonment, of discouragement. There's a lot of invisible grief that comes to light here. You might also experience survivor's guilt. So why me? Why did I survive but my neighbor didn't? Why did my house not get hit but my brothers did? You might experience performance guilt. So oftentimes this is even further exacerbated if you did have a warning phase. So what I should have or could have done to have a better outcome. And so you might experience some of that performance guilt. And then you see the reconstruction phase. So this is, the actions are rebuilding. You're seeing a lot of growth. You're gaining more routines, predictability. That new normal is really being created. Emotions, you might sense a renewed sense of strength. the confidence in the community, a lot of improved self and collective efficacy, which we'll talk about later. You can see hope increasing. You may see that new normal is being created and that there are positive outcomes. This might be when your priorities are realigned. Maybe you are able to recognize, gosh, we've had a lot of extra family time, and that's when you're starting to recognize some of those positive outcomes. Today, if we think about what we're all going through today, most of us are experiencing prolonged exposure, high levels of ambiguity, and uncertainty. All of these things, so prolonged exposure, ambiguity, uncertainty, really intensify our psychological responses and our ability to cope. During most disasters, we kind of know right away, were we harmed? Are we alive? Are we not alive? We know, kind of can measure what that impact has been to us. During public health emergencies, that's a lot different. There's uncertainty, there's fear, and there's a lot more confusion. So each and every disaster, just kind of reviewing these phases, each and every single disaster is different. It's going to be someone's personal experience, and really their reactions are an interaction between the characteristics of the disaster. So was it natural or man-made? Was there a warning? Is there a clear end to this disaster? It's going to be an interaction with the individual. So if you were warned, did you take action? How directly were you impacted? What was your previous experiences that allow you to better cope or rely on those coping strategies to get through this event? We know children oftentimes don't have all those previous experiences because they're short in life. The response. So the last thing that interacts is that response. So did your community have a plan? Were they prepared? Did first responders or resources pour in when you expected them to? How were survivors treated? Were there any ongoing unmet needs? So we're going to do a short little poll really quick. We just want to get an idea, a sense of our community here today, and sense of where we feel like you are in this disaster we're experiencing today. We'll just take a few seconds to do this. I see some responses coming in. Thank you guys for participating. Still some responses coming in. I'll stop it as soon as they slow here. Thank you all. So I think some of you might even be experienced. I know when I was trying to think about this for myself, I found it hard to define where I was at. And in some ways, I feel like I'm experiencing, and we are all experiencing, multiple compounding disasters. And so really trying to identify where I'm at and to see this as a linear process for what we're experiencing right now might be impossible. We're really experiencing multiple disasters, and therefore we might feel at different phases for different aspects of the disaster we're experiencing. So I'll just go ahead and quickly share the results. As you can see, it's exactly what we thought. There's people who are experiencing all different phases of this disaster, and I think this is a little bit unusual. Usually when there's a more confined impact zone, you're kind of going through these phases somewhat with your support groups, with your community. And I think in trying to support each other and through this experience we're going through, that's what's a little bit different for this disaster. So thank you for participating. As we proceed to talk about the 5 essential needs of the disaster, I really hope that you guys are able to keep in mind how these needs may vary in intensity and during each phase of disaster.
Before we get any further, we did want to pause for a moment and just remember a little bit about the brain. And I know this is review for many of you, but it's going to help us as we form the foundation for the 5 essential needs of kids at this time. So the brain forms obviously from the inside out, right? At our most base, we have this reptilian part of the brain. Dan Siegel uses a hand model of the brain. Those of you out there who are Dan Siegel fans will understand what I'm talking about here, and that The wrist and the forearm represents this brainstem part of your brain. This is the part of the brain that is responsible for survival. It's there to keep you alive, just like it keeps reptiles alive, right? It's there to help you breathe and to help you reproduce and to take care of your basic functional needs. The second part of the brain that you can see here is the limbic system, or the mammalian part of the brain. The important parts of the brain that are housed here are the amygdala and the hippocampus. So the amygdala is the bells and whistles alarm part of the brain. Estimated over 400 billion bits of sensory data are coming into your nervous system, traveling through your body up to your brainstem every second. We're only aware of less than 1% of that sensory data because our brainstem's sorting through what needs to be taken to the higher areas of our brain. In times of stress, the most important information is going to be that information that may potentially put us at threat. So the amygdala is going to recognize that information, and it's going to set off these alarms to the body that's like, hey, everybody, we are on high alert here. We need to fight. We need to fly out of here. Maybe we need to freeze for a second just to figure out what's going on. Or maybe we need to collapse and fall asleep. I'm going to choose to fight, flight, or freeze if there's some perception that there's something I can do about the threat in my environment. So if I think, you know, a bear is running into my house, I think I can fight it. That's a ridiculous thought, but maybe I do. then I'm going to lean more towards that fight side. If I think there's nothing I can do, I'm totally helpless in this moment, I'm going to collapse or fall asleep. Maybe fall down to play dead, hoping that the threat will just pass by me. Or maybe I'm just checked out and like, it's time for me to not be present here. So the amygdala is what fires and helps us figure out, it tells us that there's threat in the environment. The hippocampus has some connection to memory, and so the hippocampus is able to bring in those memories to what the amygdala is firing and serve as a little bit of a checks and balance to say, whoa, amygdala, slow your roll. Let's consider this possibility based on this memory that we have. When individuals are exposed to long-term amounts of stress, so kids who are coming from hard places, people who've had long-term trauma, the hippocampus actually starts to go offline. And so our ability to bring in that checks and balance system is gone, and we find ourselves flying off the handle a lot more because we're on this high alert stage constantly. So those are the big parts of the limbic system: alert and balance, alert and balance. The upper part of the brain, the cortex part, this human part of the brain, if you're using Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain, you have your reptilian part of the brain, you have your limbic system, and then what folds over that is your cortex, or the thinking part of your brain. This is where intelligence and creativity and logic and language all lie here in your cortex, what we often think of as the brain. What happens is when information comes in, the amygdala perceives it as threatening, the upstairs brain, that thinking part of the brain, goes offline, and we are functioning from this survival part of our brain. It's actually a helpful response because if there really is true threat in the environment, you don't necessarily have time to stop and think through everything and reason through everything and make decisions. If a bear really is coming in my house right now, I need to go before I even have a chance to think about it. So that's the importance of this response. What becomes challenging is when we get stuck in that place of fight, flight, or freeze, or stuck in that place of collapse and fall asleep, right? So big deep breath. Consciously choosing to take a big deep breath links the linking part of my brain to the survival part of our brain, giving my whole brain an opportunity to come online, to be present, and to problem solve, leading us to this place of safety that Lindsey's going to talk about.
We're going to try to take a lot of deep breaths during this. This is helpful as we soak in all this information and try to keep it as simple as possible. So everyone has a need to feel safe that is deeply rooted in their brain for survival. So let's go back to the brain for a minute. The brainstem houses the survival instincts. The limbic system houses the emotion and connections, and the cortex, the thinking and the problem solving. So when overwhelmed, just as Cara stated, the brain flips that lid, causing logic to disconnect, and we must calm the brain to restore that closed lid brain. So the real question is, how do we calm the brain? And we calm it by the bottom up. So in order to calm this brainstem, We have to create a felt sense of safety. We have to experience a felt sense of safety. So what I mean by that is we have to, safety is both objective, so factual, so like there's things that keep us safe and those are facts, and subjective. So what am I personally feeling? What is my perception of safety regardless of what the facts are? And sometimes those aren't connected. So that felt sense of safety is how safe do we feel inside? We must remove actual and perceived threats to reduce that physiological response to fear and anxiety. We just can't say you are safe, especially with kids. We can't just tell them you're safe and they're going to automatically feel safe. We often have to describe why they're safe, the things that make them feel safe, and listen to those things that they're saying that make them feel unsafe. So we must make one both feel and experience being safe. To do this, we have to assess those threats they're experiencing and collectively try to mitigate those. So work together to mitigate those threats. So for myself, an example recently, I recognized that this idea of COVID being transmitted through community spread was a real threat to me. Community spread meant I didn't know where it was coming from. It's a fear of the unknown I was having, and I couldn't avoid that. And I didn't know where COVID might come. At any point, it might attack my sense of safety. I didn't know where that would come from. It was a fear of the unknown. In an effort to mitigate that, I had to make personal decisions on how I was going to limit my own exposure to others and how I was going to reduce risk when unable to avoid it. So things such as, okay, I'm going to wash my hands a lot, so much where I get eczema, right? I'm going to just wash my hands a lot. Anytime I go anywhere, touch anything, touch a handle, touch a light switch, I'm going to wash my hands constantly. I'm going to avoid touching my face, and I'm going to limit trips to the grocery store. This is what makes me feel more safe. These are things I can control that mitigate that threat, that fear, that anxiety about COVID being community spread for myself. So a few tangible examples how we support a felt sense of safety for children, for others. So establishing predictability, and even for ourselves, I should add. Establishing predictability. We know this. This is what we do a lot of times as child specialists, creating routines, setting up expectations. We provide accurate and organized and consistent information. So when you're getting information from various sources and they seem to be contradicting each other, that negates feelings of safety. That creates a sense of mistrust, misleading. We don't know what's correct, what's not. So we can't create that sense of felt safety. We assist children to reconceptualize an experienced threat. So for instance, let's say a tornado happened. We can talk about how that night the tornado hit was an unsafe time, but not all nights are unsafe. So reconceptualizing, reframing the catastrophizing of a threat. And one other big thing is limiting media exposure. So we know that uncertainty and fear always raises up the reviews or the views for media. And so unfortunately it is the business. And so you're wanting to get more viewers to your channel, you're gonna create a sense of uncertainty and fear. So then you have to get more news and more information from the station. So finding a trusted source might even be a secondhand source of news that you can get without having to watch the news, where you're taking in all of that abundant of sensory information, but finding someone else that you can get the facts, the new facts coming out from. Remember, I think one thing that I've been really trying to recall a lot is that even when I can't totally achieve safety, even just enhancing small bits of safety can really aid in children's and ourselves and how we are able to cope and process and experience our disaster.
So safety is that first essential need of human beings and children after or during the time of a disaster. The interesting thing about safety is when disaster strikes or when trauma or crisis comes into our world, we often look to external sources to feel that sense of safety. The interesting thing that's happening right now in our world is there really isn't anywhere that's safe. Everyone is affected by this, right? Oftentimes in disaster, those affected by disaster, helpers come from the outside. and we weren't affected, but we're here to help you, and we have the resources because we didn't lose anything. But right now, literally the entire world is part of this collective disaster experience. And so as we look for those places that cause us to feel safe, it can be very difficult to find those. This is where the key of self-regulation comes into place. Because really the safest place to be is right here with myself. If I can take a big deep breath, right? The vagal nerve allows me to go into that relaxation place in my body, that safe place of rest and restore. If any of you are Lisa Dion fans, or if you don't know Lisa Dion, she's the creator of synergetic play therapy. She's an amazing leader in the play therapy world, but her work is very applicable to all areas of professional development, particularly child life. She's a big fan of child life specialists. She recently did a free webinar on regulating during the coronavirus. It's excellent. I highly recommend it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this right now. So if this is a piece that feels important to you, I would recommend you going. Synergeticplaytherapy.com is her website. You can click on her learning opportunities and get a hold of that free resource, that free webinar. But she talks a lot about finding safety in ourselves, within ourselves, through self-regulation. I think this piece of regulation is really important. The research that we're going from and where we're getting these 5 essential needs calls this promoting a sense of calm. I would like to challenge that word only because when I think of calm, I think of the world falling apart around me and I'm just sitting here like, it's all good. Like, we're fine, like everything's fine. And that's not really what we're talking about in this promoting a sense of regulation. Really what regulation allows us to do is regulate toward the feelings and emotions that we're having rather than regulating away from them. And this may feel familiar to some of you right now. I know for me, when this COVID thing started, there was a lot of anxiety happening within me, but I wasn't allowing myself to recognize it. I'm fine, things are gonna be fine, we're gonna get through this, I have to hold myself together, I'm supposed to be the professional here, right? And then one night it just hit me and I just started to cry. And rather than stop and fight it, I let myself sit down and cry and fully feel those feelings of anxiety. Not to the point that it flooded me and took me away, but I allowed myself to ride the wave of emotion, to feel my way through these really challenging feelings that I was having, which in the end increases my capacity to feel them. So when we talk about regulation, we're not talking about pulling kids out of the feeling or pulling ourselves out of the feeling. We're talking about finding a safe way to feel that feeling. Let me tell you a story, my favorite self-regulation story, co-regulation story, external regulation story. Was I was working with a kid in the hospital, and this was after a car accident, so we would consider that a disaster, right? A crisis situation. And he had been run over by a car. And I was with a student and he was driving a cozy coupe, just laps around the hospital. And at one point I had a staff member ask me a question. So I turned my back and was talking to the staff and I heard behind me this big crash. I turn around, the cozy coupe is knocked over. The child is standing there just flooding and tears and crying and really, really upset. So I walk up to the child and I kneel down, and he's about 3 years old, and he just crawls into my arms and just cries. And here's the point where my decision is made, right? Am I going to go to this place with this child and regulate with him? Or am I going to do what is often is expected of me as a child life specialist, snap my fingers and pull this kid into happiness really quickly? But I recognized that what this kid needed was the chance to feel these big feelings and a safe person to do it with. I can be his external regulator in this moment. Lisa Dion refers to it as rocking the baby in every one of us, right? Picking up that 3-year-old just like I would an infant and just rocking his nervous system and being there with him in the sadness. And so that's what I did. I just stood there and I was naming what was going on for me. I was breathing. I was feeling myself connected. And the staff said to me, Cara, he has Bubbles and his favorite book in his room. Go get him. It makes him laugh all the time. And my response was, I think we're going to try something different today, y'all. I think we're going to actually just cry. And you should have seen everyone's faces like, what? That's not what your job is. Like, your job is to make the kids happy. But it was interesting because a crowd just gathered and you could feel that they all felt that we're just going to cry this out together. And pretty soon his sobs turned to little sighs. And pretty soon he was doing the little shaky, big, deep breath, and then he fell asleep in my arms. He was able to regulate to that point of safety where he was able to fall asleep and rest and recover. It was a pretty powerful moment for me in advocating for us as child life specialists in these big, hard moments to just go to the place with the kid that they're feeling and provide a safe way for them to feel through it. Just to go back to the brain a little bit, because I think this is really important right here. This is also Lisa Dion's work. And she talks about the 4 ways that the brain perceives challenge. Okay, so when we talked about the information coming in through the brainstem, going up through the amygdala, which fires if it's going to see if there's something threatening in the environment. If one of these 4 things happens, that's when the amygdala fires. So the first one is threat to a physical or emotional harm. So if our body is in harm, the amygdala is going to fire, right? That's a given. It's like, hey, fight, flight, freeze, fall asleep, collapse. We got to do something here. We're in danger. So that one's pretty well known. The second one is the unknown. So I walk into an environment where my memory or my experiences don't have a lot to draw on to help me know whether or not this is a safe environment. So I'm going to assume it's not, because my goal is to keep myself safe at all costs, right? So if there's unknown in this environment, then I'm going to go to that place of it's not safe. I'm going to respond dysregulation. And also in states of unknown, if I am in an unknown experience, my tendency is going to be to draw from other unknown experiences that didn't go very well. So my assumption is something bad is happening. The third one is incongruence in the environment, where information is not adding up. That may be information coming from different areas and I'm not sure who to trust. It could be that what's being told to me and what I'm feeling are not adding up. My child life example for this is when the nurse comes in with a smile on her face and a needle in her hand and says everything's going to be okay. And my body says, needle, not okay, smiling person, I don't think I can trust you. I need to be on high alert here. I'm probably going to be in danger. The fourth one is shoulds, and shoulds are kind of incongruence inside of me, where I am feeling one way but should be another. This is me as a child life specialist in a procedure that's going really bad. I should be able to help this kid. The staff is looking at me. I should be able to do my job. As soon as I start shoulding all over myself, my brain flips, right? And I lose access to that thinking part of my brain, and I'm stuck here in this survival. You've seen this in yourselves. You've seen this in students all the time, that fight, flight, probably freeze or collapse and fall asleep response that comes when we get overwhelmed. Right? So these 4 things are the challenges we perceive in the environment. So I'd like you to look at this list right now from the perception of disaster, and particularly right now where we find ourselves in this COVID-19. Is there a threat to our physical harm? Yeah, right? Is there unknown? Oh my gosh, so much unknown. Is there incongruence in the environment? Absolutely. Turn on 2 different news stations and you're going to get 2 different stories of what's happening. Ask different professionals and you're going to find what's more important for us to be doing right now. And are there shoulds? Yeah, I should be able to homeschool my kids right now, but I should also be able to do my job. I should be able to be alone. What's wrong with me that I can't be alone right now? Like, there's just so many shoulds that are happening for us. And so we are living in a dysregulated world right now. The whole entire world is dysregulated. And what happens is our nervous system is feeling that and connecting to it. It's really challenging right now to stay regulated. And more so than that, in our professional capacity to serve as the external regulator for the world around us that feels like it's falling apart. So this is really helpful just as awareness. When you feel yourself going into those dysregulated states, recognize like what may be happening right now that's causing me to do this. Is this a should? If it's a should, let it go, right? Like there's not a lot of shoulds that we really have to live with right now. There's a lot of grace for us to not being doing things. Maybe it's a piece of the unknown, and maybe I can remind myself and remind myself of those things that I do know that I can do in this situation, or maybe I can remind myself of times where unknown actually turned out good for me instead of different. But when we do become dysregulated, here's our options. This is another Lisa Dion. I'm a huge Lisa Dion fan. If you don't know, I think she's amazing and her work is awesome. And this is a free resource that's available on her website right now. In the middle, you'll see what it looks like to be regulated. Okay. When I'm regulated, I can experience a full range of emotions. I can be angry and regulated. I can also be angry and dysregulated. Angry and dysregulated, I'm flying off the handle. You can't really speak to me. I don't really know what's going on. I'm punching walls. And when it's all over, I don't really remember what happened. But I can be regulated and angry, where I'm able to make eye contact with you. I can speak what I'm feeling. I can name the sensations of my body of, I am really tense right now. I can feel the heat coming from my feet all the way up to my face, right? I can take a deep breath and I can feel this anger. I'm riding the wave of that emotion rather than getting swept away by it. So in the center here is what it looks like to be regulated. The parasympathetic side, which is on my right side, I assume it's on your right side as well, is a great place to be when it's time for us to rest and restore. But again, what I'm talking about here is this dysregulated state of overwhelm, of falling asleep, of just, I mean, this was me the first 2 weeks of COVID. I literally laid on my couch and did nothing. Like, it was just like I collapsed and fell asleep. And it was also my spring break, so that was really unhelpful because I had 2 weeks of spring break, so I could just lay on my couch and do nothing. So that's that side. And on the other side is that fight, flight, or freeze, the hyperarousal, the anxiety, the overwhelm. So we'd like to do another little poll just to get you involved here and ask you where you found yourself the majority of your time during these last few weeks of COVID. Have you found yourself in that hyper-aroused state where you're like anxious and maybe irritable and snapping at your loved ones, or just overwhelmed by the thought of everything that's going on? Are you hypo-aroused? You're just kind of checking out. Like, you can't really even remember the last 2 weeks. Or maybe you find yourself kind of oscillating back and forth between extremes of these two. So just take a second and just let us know where you are. I'll leave it up to you, Linz, to decide.
Looks like we got most results in.
Are you sharing it with us? Oh, there we go. Okay, so pretty even. Yeah, and then a lot of you have found yourself kind of back and forth between both. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I at the beginning of all of this was totally checked out. Honestly, after watching Lisa Dion's webinar, I started taking cold showers. Literally changed my life. Like, it's like my nervous system came back online again, and holy cow, it was pretty awesome. So our goal here is to stay regulated. And the last thing I'm gonna say in this regulation piece, because I want us to get on to the next 3, is that this is the other piece of Lisa Dion's handout right here, which are some really great regulating activities. When you recognize yourself going into that hyper or hypo state, here's some really great ideas to bring you and to bring kids back in, right? To go for a walk, to eat something crunchy, to take a cold shower, to drink something cold really slow. The biggest one is your breathing, to take a big deep breath. If you're feeling checked out, focus on your inhale. If you're feeling overwhelmed, focus on your exhale. Okay? So whatever breath you need to take a deep breath right now. We'll do it together. Awesome. Now Lindsay's going to share our next one.
So the third need we want to discuss today is that sense of self and collective efficacy. So efficacy is a sense that actions are going to lead to positive outcomes. So whether it's your own actions or your community actions, there's going to be, you have control to create something more positive in the future. So by definition, disasters inherently encompass a loss of one's ability to manage or control threat. This experience can quickly become catastrophized in the sense that you start to tell yourself that you can't do, or we as a community cannot do. People have to feel like they have the skills to overcome a threat and solve problems. And the way we do this is by seeing it. We have to see it to believe it. The World Health Organization and UNICEF recognize that the restoration of schools in a community is essential in reestablishing this sense of self and community efficacy during disasters. So oftentimes when a disaster hits, one of the first priorities for a community is get that school up and running. That demonstrates that we are starting to overcome, that we're starting to bounce back. And it also allows for opportunities for continued self-efficacy. So schools opening back up are a sign of that community efficacy, but learning opportunities happen in school. So our growth, pro-social activities, sports, different groups, band, choir, all those things offered that center in schools, bringing families together, all enhance our identity or identifying and our overall sense of that self and community efficacy. So today, that might be kind of ringing for you strongly. We experience mass school closures all over the globe, really. We have to identify different ways to promote self and collective efficacy. So how might we do that? So we assist children in identifying their own personal strengths. So how have you gotten through tough times before? Maybe identifying a time that they experienced as tough and how they got through that. Assisting in recognizing those community strengths that already exist. So maybe the same thing for communities. Remember, we've been flooded before, and we overcame that. Engaging children in relief efforts, engaging ourselves in relief efforts. And I say children a lot, but we're talking about things we can do for ourselves too, and our neighbors and our family members. So engage in those. Do something positive in this world. I know at my house we've been doing a lot of kind messages of chalk. My communities put on a teddy bear scavenger hunt. We're putting teddy bears to lift the spirits in the community. So again, that sense of I have control or I can take action to create something positive. Promote existing active coping techniques. So when you see something positive going on, like someone taking a big deep breath, say, recognize that. I've seen you take a deep breath and that even makes me feel calm. Recognize the value of that for children. Practicing those emotion regulation skills, thinking about, our guided imagery practices, breathing exercises, really stimulating that vagus nerve. Providing real choices that promote increased senses of control. So we can provide choices like, do you want spaghetti or lasagna for dinner? Do you want to sit outside and have a picnic, or do you want to sit at the kitchen table tonight? So real choices really enhance that sense of control, that sense of efficacy. Encouraging children to have active problem solving. How do you think you could help with this problem we're experiencing today? Cara, I think you had a really great example from the Bahamas about kind of empowering children and creating a higher sense of efficacy. Do you mind sharing?
Yeah. So when we were in the Bahamas, the kids had obviously, their homes had been destroyed. They'd been removed, evacuated from the island that they lived on to a different island that was more safe for them. And there was a lot of aggression in their play. And there was a lot of block building that was taking place, a lot of building buildings and watching them fall down. There was one instance in particular where the kids were building these really nice high towers, and there was a girl who wasn't playing that was just standing and watching them build the towers, kind of pretty checked out. As soon as the tower would get high, she would wake up, she would rock over, she would destroy the tower, and then she would run away. And the kids would get furious, right? Because they'd spent all this time building this tower. So in that moment, the instinct of an adult is to step in and to help those kids solve that problem, right? To tell that girl, you can't come in this space, to tell these kids to go over here. But as part of this self-efficacy and this collective efficacy is helping the kids problem solve and figure it out themselves. So I just joined them in the frustration of what was going on. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that girl just came over here and did that. You built that so tall and now it's all that hard work and it's destroyed and I don't know what to do. Well, what happened is the kids started to band together, right? They started to problem solve together. We're going to build our tower together and we're all going to surround the tower so that this girl can't come in anymore. And we're going to be here and we're going to make this safe for us. And what an awesome, empowering moment for kids to have power over destruction because they collectively came together as a community. So some of this stuff can be done just through the play experiences that we're offering to kids, not necessarily that we have to go out and actually solve COVID, but give them chance to have some control and some efficacy over what's happening in their environment as they play through what they're experiencing. Okay, so the fourth area that's essential to kids and to humans at the time of disaster is to promote a feeling of connectedness. And this can be one of the most important things is for people to feel like they are part of something. Fostering connection as quickly as possible after disaster occurs is really important for long-term positive responses. It's important for kids to feel part of something, to feel seen, to problem solve together with others, to be able to relate and connect over the sensations and feelings and experiences that they've had going through this disaster. Obviously, it's interesting right now. We find ourselves in kind of a challenging time of promoting that connectedness when we're being required to be separate. There's obviously a lot of really great, awesome things happening to connect people to their peers and to their family members virtually. And it's all really great and important, finding new ways for us to be together, even though we're apart. I think that's actually one of the good things that's come out of this, is our recognition of our need for humans when we're told that we can't be part of them. And so I think that there's a lot of really good work that's been happening virtually. So I would like to challenge us as a community to also make sure that we are finding, when at all possible, and I live by myself, so I understand the challenge. So please don't hear me saying that the virtual connection is not powerful and important. It absolutely is. I want us to make sure that we are also promoting that connection with out screens, the connection that can take place without screens among those people who are living together. Dan Siegel also talks about, when he talks about connection, he also talks about it as the importance to connect to nature. So human beings and to nature. So can we go out and just walk in our bare feet in the grass in our backyard if we have access to that? If not, if you're stuck in an apartment, can you open the windows and let the breeze come through? Can you listen for the birds? So connecting to nature, and then also connecting to others. So not just physical proximity, but really feeling felt and seen and heard by the people around us. That intentional presence, the attunement of a caregiver to a child, the healthy touch of human connection. I can tell you, as a single person living by myself, that is what I crave most right now, is the touch of other humans. And then the importance of playful engagement as a piece of connectedness for kids. I'm going to tell you one more story. I know I'm a big storyteller, but I like to tell stories. And this also came from the Bahamas. And I was I was sitting by myself with some blocks on a mat, and a 12-year-old boy walked by me. And I just made eye contact with him. And 12-year-old boy, I had literally wooden blocks. I wasn't putting a lot of merit in the fact that he would actually sit down with me, but I just kind of looked at him and offered and said, "You want to play?" And he sat down with me, and he picked up a couple of the blocks and he stacked them on top of each other. Well, first of all, he said, "I don't know what to build." And I said, "I don't know what to build either." And so he started to stack blocks, and he stacked one that looked like a house. And he said, "It's my house." And blocks were yellow. So I said, "Oh, the house is yellow." And he said, "No, actually my house is white and it has blue shutters." And he started to describe to me his home from his island that he lived on in the Bahamas. And then he built the London Bridge. And I was just there with him as he built the London Bridge. And then he started to build something else, and I wasn't sure what it was. And I said, I don't know if I know what that is. And he said, it's a dock. It's the dock by my house. And that moment of connection, of play, of totally child-directed play, which I will tell you this, of all the interventions that we have to offer kids in a time of disaster, the most crucial and important is the opportunity for child-directed play, where we are present and attuned to the play and not doing any leading. Research shows that this is the most powerful thing to do after disaster. Interventions that cause kids to have to talk about their experience has actually proven to be long-term detrimental. So if we can just provide them the opportunity to lead us, and if we can be present and attuned and paying attention and follow, that's where I'm frozen. Am I frozen?
I think it might just be her. I'm still seeing you, Cara.
Okay, sorry. Okay, I'm not frozen. Thank you guys. Okay, I'm not frozen. If we can be present and attuned, then that's where the magic happens. So I just stayed there with the kid, and from building his house and building his dock, he began to tell me his whole story. He said, the rain came down, and I wasn't scared of the rain because I knew I could swim, but the wind came, and the wind is what scared me. So his family had to evacuate, and they had to run up to the church, and he builds me the church out of blocks, and he talks about climbing into the rafters of the church, and the doors swinging open, and the water rushing in, and he builds the boat that comes to pick him up, and he gets in the boat. This whole time, I'm not saying anything, I'm not asking anything, I'm I'm just sitting back and allowing him to lead this play. And he takes the boat, and the boat is crowded and people are throwing up, and the driver is really bad and the water is really chompy and it smelled really bad. And he ends up back and just tells me his whole story, building the bridge that he came under and came to the place that he was in this place of safety that he found himself in. And from that moment, that was the only intervention I had with that kid. But every time that I saw him in the shelter that week, we made eye contact and connected and knew that we had that shared moment of being seen and felt. And that's what he needed to feel, that connection. So stay connected through your screens when you have to, but when possible, really make intentional connection with kids to help them feel seen and heard and in tune to in these moments.
What a powerful story. So the fifth and final need we're discussing today is the need to promote hope, to have hope. During disasters, we experience a shattered worldview. We often experience this to various degrees. Our worldview is comprised of three basic assumptions. The world is generally kind and good. Second one being the world's meaningful. Everything happens for a reason. And the third one being that we are worthy. So I deserve success. I can control positive and negative outcomes. The shattering of these three assumptions in our worldview really can result in a feeling of all is lost. I'll never have a home again, as you might hear. Whereas it will take probably several months to rebuild that home. And so really thinking about how can we pick up those shattered pieces of that worldview and more realistically frame those thoughts and those feelings. So hope is most apparent in those that retain optimism, that have a strong sense of self and community efficacy, which makes sense. If we believe we can influence that positive outcome, we believe we can take action, then we're going to have more hope. Hope often comes from a superior force or a God, a belief in something higher and more powerful than us. Hope is a result of a sense of a responsive government, a responsive community, a responsive nation, that we are in a safe place. I think that goes back to safety. And then hope can also come from a superstitious belief or previous experiences. So I am lucky when I need it, things always work out. When I need the money falls from trees. It always seems to work out. It's gonna come together. So that's people who retain those beliefs often have higher amounts of hope. How can we support increasing that sense of hope? We can engage children in forward-thinking exercises. I know that one of our friends and one of our Child Life Disaster Relief local program managers had posted on social media that she's engaging her children in creating a when COVID is over book. So what do they want to do when they can get out of their homes and interact with others? Who do they want to spend time with? I think that's an awesome way to engage children, trying to forward thinking that this is going to get over. There is going to be an end to it. We may not be able to define that end, but really planning for that future, creating something to look forward to is really, really important. Reassuring others that we have overcome successfully hard experiences. A common phrase that we use, and I think really needs to be paid attention to, is that you're experiencing a normal reaction to abnormal situations. So oftentimes we have these experiences to something traumatic, to a disaster, and we know that they're normal. We would expect things to happen. It doesn't mean that you have a psychological disorder, but it means that you're experiencing that normal reaction. So that's a common phrase we'll use in disaster relief. But I think there's an underlying message that we have to be especially careful of when we're working with others. And that particular wording of you're experiencing a normal reaction to an abnormal situation, that particular wording might come off and sound dismissive or insensitive to that survivor, to that person is trying to tell you how they're feeling and that they have some sort of need, and saying that's normal almost dismisses your ability to help them. Okay, if that's normal, then there's no resource that you can give me to help me through this experience. So it may be more helpful to explain that many people are experiencing those similar feelings, and most people feel better after that some time has passed. Or I think about, going into the hospital setting, sometimes, we can't tell children exactly how it'll feel, but we often would say, I don't know how it'll feel for you, but I know that most kids say this is what happens. So I think just really being mindful of how our the words we choose to use with kids and how open and available that makes us for providing help that they're asking for. Emphasizing their strengths, identifying something positive. So let me rephrase that. I want to be very careful. So identifying positive outcomes is something I've experienced within this COVID. I'm already experiencing, gosh, it's really nice to have this extra family time, right? We have to identify those on our own. I like to refer to this as child-led benefit finding, self-led benefit finding. We have to allow others to find those benefits themselves. And then once we hear those, or we recognize someone is stating that they feel there's some sort of successful or powerful thing going on that is a positive out of disaster, then we can emphasize it. So an example, my child recently said, Mom, I really like homeschool. I get to spend more time with you, and I get to go outside whenever I want. So like my response was, yes, it is so amazing that we're getting extra time to be together as a family and spend time outdoors. I'm really enjoying that time too. Whereas until he identified that he enjoyed that, he might not be experiencing that positive benefit. He might not be wanting to spend more time with me. And so until he's able to identify that, we cannot emphasize that for him. So I know when we were talking about this, Cara referred to it as don't put the cherry on top. Let other people put their own cherry on the top. So don't lead kids in creating what the positive is going to be, but allow them to really lead that for themselves, and then you just accentuate it. Wait for them to identify their strengths on their own.
Lindsey, there's a question in the Q&A for you about repeating those three assumptions under hope. If you maybe just want to type that in an answer that everybody can see.
I got it. Thanks.
Okay, so just to review, take a big deep breath. These are the 5 essential needs that we as human beings, that children have right now during COVID. And if we can focus our attention on these 5 essential needs, on a sense of safety, a sense of regulation, a sense of self and collective efficacy, a sense of connectedness, and a sense of hopefulness, that's really what's going to allow us to come out of this more resilient than when we went in. So we're going to ask you to do a little self-reflection right now. I think the biggest thing for us to do is we're working with kids and families is to recognize that these needs are going to be different for each of us at different phases for these disasters. My need for safety may be larger right now than my need for hopefulness, right? Until I feel safe, there's not really much hope for me. But later, my need for hopefulness, when I start to feel like this is lasting forever, I feel pretty safe. I'm able to isolate, but I need to know that there's light at the end of this tunnel. That's going to be different for me then. So we're going to poll you one more time and ask you to assess yourselves in this moment. What do you think your greatest need is? As you reflect on this right now, you personally, maybe that area that you recognize that some of your responses to what are happening is because you have this need to feel more regulated, or you have this need to feel more in control and have some efficacy. Just take a minute and choose your own adventure. Okay, you got it, Lindsay? Are they still pouring in?
Oh, there, I was on mute. They're still pouring in. Here we go.
Takes a minute to self-reflect. Okay, what do we got? Ooh, interesting. Yeah. So you can see that even in our little community that we have here, we are spread out. I hear you on that need to connection. The one thing that is talked about in disaster relief is the importance of building social areas outside of people's tents so that they don't get stuck in their own tent, which is hard to do right now, right? Because we're asked to be stuck in our own tent. So finding those ways for us to connect as a community. I will tell you the one thing amazing in my neighborhood right now is when I go for my run, every neighbor comes out and waves at me and says hello. That's never happened in my whole entire life. That's the one thing coming out of this that I'm thankful for, is that my neighbors have gotten to know each other from 10 feet away. So yeah, so the need is for connection for you. So our challenge for you as you go from this webinar, as we end our time together, is to focus your attention on finding a way that this week you can find a way to feel more connected for yourself, recognizing that these are the same needs in each of us that they are as we're working with kids. And that'll then equip us to be better able to help meet these needs in kids and families. So we hope this has simplified a little bit the needs that are out there right now, maybe helped us identify where we can focus some of our attention as we work with each other and with kids and families. We thank you for being part of our community. If you do have some questions, we've reached the end of our webinar time, so we'll say goodbye to those of you who need to move on, but we will hang out for a little bit if anybody does have some specific questions that they would like to ask us. This recording will be available at disasterrelief.org under our webinar. You'll be able to get the recording. Those of you who have attended right now, you will get an email that has the PDU certificate for this webinar. For those who need to join later, they'll have a quiz that they take to get theirs. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Stay connected with us. Follow us on social media. That's one way we can build some connection and some community right now. And hang in there. We appreciate all of you. These slides are not going to be shared via email, but the recording will be available on our website, so you can go back and review it whenever you want to. You can take screenshots and pictures if that's a way that you learn better.
Thank you, guys.